I'm Chris Laoutaris. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Shakespeare Beyond Borders Alliance Equality Shakespeare Festival. This is the first of 3 exciting readings and interviews today with stellar poets and authors whose pioneering work has been inspired by Shakespeare. So today we've got Luke Kennard, Sally Bailey, and Neil Hall. Luke's joining us today. I'm so grateful to you, Luke, for taking the time to speak to us, especially on such a lovely sunny day. And you know, it's very warm outside. And as a Luke Kennard fan, you know what I like to do when it's warm? I like to use my own Luke Kennard fan of books to call myself. It's very refreshing. And whoever's not using a Luke Kennard fan is sadly behind the times, so I urge you all to purchase some books. I've got a few here which I absolutely love, including Luke's The Solex Brothers, which won an Eric Gregory Poetry Award. The Migraine Hotel, another fabulous book. Cain, and the book we're going to talk about today, which is Notes on the Sonnets. And this is an amazing book. As soon as I read it, I felt it just had this epic feel. I think people are going to be reading this for decades and centuries to come. And I just felt I really wanted to interview you, Luke. And before we do that, I just thought I'll give you a short introduction. So you're a poet, novelist, critic, and reader here at the University of Birmingham. Your credits and accolades are so huge, Luke. It would take a whole hour just to go through them. So a few highlights here. Luke was the recipient of an Eric Gregory Poetry Award, as I said earlier. He was named one of the next generation poets by the Poetry Book Society in 2014, a prediction which was very accurate. He was the Poetry Society and Canal and River Trust's Canal Laureate from 2016 to 17. He was shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best Poetry Collection for his second collection, The Harbour Beyond the Movie, and was the youngest poet ever to be accorded that accolade. He's the author of at least, I think it's 10 poetry collections by my count. And that
some of them are kind of pamphlets, some of them are
and I think that actually if you add the pamphlets, it comes to more than 10, I think, if you add all the pamphlets to that list, including other kinds of publication, plus 2 novels published by Fourth Estate, The Transition, which was a BBC Radio 4 book at bedtime and was long listed for the Desmond Elliott Prize, and The Answer to Everything, which was published last year. His experimental short story, Holofin, was the Saboteur Novella Award, won the Saboteur Novella Award in 2012, and his poetry collection, Cain, was shortlisted for the International Dylan Thomas Prize. He won the Forward Prize for Best Poetry Collection for Notes on the Sonnets last year, and we're going to be talking about that today. And in a moment, Luke's going to give us a reading from this fabulous collection of prose poems inspired by Shakespeare's sonnets. Thank you so much, Luke, for joining us. And yeah, I'll leave the floor to you so you can work your magic reading us some of your amazing prose poems. I'll switch off my camera while you do that, and then I'll pop back in and we can chat about them.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Chris, thank you. Thank you for that unusually generous and fulsome introduction. It's really, really nice to be here. It's a real pleasure to be asked to read. I'm grateful. I've got 10. I prepared 10 of them to read. So this book responds to the 154 sonnets with a prose poem and various different kinds of takes on the prose poem, sometimes using sort of various internal poetic techniques, sometimes kind of anti-poetic. I guess one of the things that I felt when I was writing it was that for the most famous sonnets, my response had to be almost the least poetic, had to be the most kind of insolent in response to that. I won't say too much between the poems because it would be just nice to save that for a discussion with Chris afterwards. It has the book has a really, really brief introduction, which was edited down from about 3,000 words. I wrote this little essay to try to introduce the idea and try to explain what I was doing with it, and the editor really didn't like it and suggested we just went with the following, which is: all of this takes place at the same house party. The order of the sonnets is determined by the order of events. They are to be seen as improvisations or annotations or variations. I'll start with the first one, which is a response to Sonnet 66, which was initially just a standalone poem. It was just going to be a one-off, sort of a distorted account of something that actually happened to me at a house party. It's formatted so that the opening lines of the sonnets and their numbers kind of form the, not necessarily the titles, but just like a little reference point at the top of the page, which was my editor's idea rather than mine. So thanks to him for finding some way of actually arranging the work that just about made sense. Sonnet 66, tired with all these for restful death I cry. Sometimes a party feels like a portal you have to pass through, sometimes not. I don't know with cocaine. It's like everyone cheating on the same cryptic crossword. My ideal recreational drug would be a pill that makes people feel more insecure, and I'm the only one at the party not taking it. I'm in the kitchen with a man who says he can recite any of Shakespeare's sonnets if someone gives him a number from 1 to 154. And I'm like, wow, that's great. 66? And he says, no, not 66. Anything but that. I'm like, okay, haha, you're full of shit. He says, I'm not lying. I'm just not reciting Sonnet 66 tonight or any other night. I hate it. This has honestly never happened to me before. Give me any other number. And I find that hard to believe, because if you're asked to pick a random number from 1 to 154, the chances are you might pick 66. But I sip from the rum and coke someone gave me, and I sigh, and I say, okay, 102. And he starts, and I swear to God, this is a true story. He starts cold. My love is strengthened, though more weak in seeming. I turn on the convection hob and put my palm on it. I've helpfully given myself page references on this document on my other screen, which are not usually quite that well organized. So this will be seamless, no chat, no time wasting between poems. This is, I'm leaping over to page 37. This is a response to sonnet number 6, then let not winter's ragged hand deface, which you'll probably know is one of the procreation sonnets. In this response, I got really stuck on the multiples of 10. That's down to thee, to a breeze another thee, be it 10 times stronger, be it 10 for 1. Various lines like that. Repeats about 5 or 6 times throughout the poem. And this is a sort of vaguely dreamlike response to that. Sonnet 6. I had a dream that there were 10 of you, and we lived in a duplex overlooking the river. It was the only nice part of town. I wanted to make 10 of you happy, but it was difficult, and mostly I felt like I was letting at least 8 of you down. Even though the 10 of you were exactly you and exactly the same, you cannot stroke 10 people's hair and tell them they are good, they are so good, and oh, the divergent seconds where lived experience changed you. Even the inanities. I love what you've done to your hair. Is that a new top? Could you just shift over a little? I didn't think I was up to the job. So this is a job for you. I don't want to make any special claims here. Nobody ever walked down to a river without at least considering taking a dive. We only owned 9 mugs, for instance, and it only struck me years later, snow fishing in a void I'd learned to wrap around myself, how easy it would have been for me to do something about that. This is Sonnet 38, which begins, how can my muse want subject to invent? Some of the responses, some of the prose poems, I guess, more ostensibly take place at the party than others. Sometimes it's like the speaker just goes on a little inner journey. This one is one of the slightly more narrative ones where the narrator meets a mathematician who becomes something of a running character throughout. Exactly what kind of party this is, apart from a house party, and a slightly depressing one, isn't ever quite specified, but there are people from various different disciplines present. It's an interdisciplinary house party, is what it is. Badly catered. 38. The mathematician draws sequences of W's and M's in the condensation on the window. Every interval contains infinite transcendental numbers. Okay, she says. Yes, I say. I'm genuinely interested. Do you want to draw the next one? M, W, M, W, W, M, W, W, W. No, she says. That's too many W's. She draws another sequence. This sequence cannot occur anywhere in the infinite list of sequences, even though it's infinite. Do you understand? No, I tell her. I'm an intuitionist. Each muse is responsible for two muses, who are in turn responsible for two muses, who are responsible for two muses. Zoom out far enough and it looks like a flower. Further and it just looks like the world. Look, you did ask, she says, clearing the window with her sleeve. I was having a nice night. Take this party, I say. It remains forever in the status of creation, but is not a closed realm of things existing in themselves. Actual infinity was taken as a threat to the absolute infinity of God. At one point, George Cantor sent a letter directly to Pope Leo XIII to clarify, all infinities are at the disposal of the Almighty. Cantor's youngest son died in 1899, while Cantor was in the middle of giving a lecture on Baconian theory and Shakespeare. Shakespeare's only son died aged 11 in 1596. Is it mindless sentimentality to feel sad about this? What is that feeling? The universe, if real, must be finite. She grabs one of my earlobes and squeezes hard, in both space and time. You're hurting me. The essence of mathematics is its freedom. She lets go of my ear. No one shall expel us from the paradise it has created. Seven. Gosh, what a weird poem to choose. I never read this one out. Let's go with it. Anyway, debut for this poem. Sonnet 134. So now I have confessed that he is thine. Yeah, no idea quite why I chose this one, but let's go with it. Fine. A lipless man is playing the upright piano. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. Causa sui. The host is gradually paying off the balance by teaching private students. We all have to be out of here by 9:30 a.m. The crying man sings, "How Will I Love Again," in hazmat suits and bright white torches, hazelnuts on scalding porches, in Dobsonian reflector scopes. The physicists are doing shots. They talk of parallels and dots, so much noise in a quiet town. They are making a giant plug for black holes and patenting the smallest parts. The heat of the moment. Do not listen to this man. I wish I'd never introduced you. Might as well talk to a headache. We cannot be satisfied. He points at me and says, negative equity. Yes, you were saying. There are worse reasons to get in a fight. From now on, I'm only dating catalogue models on windswept hills in wholesome jumpers. I can't hear you, but I suspect you're annoyed with me, in the late style, in the wrong quarter, in the friable hours, quotes derisively and says, I mean, what brings the lid down on your fingers? Our Heracles was overthrown by debt consolidation loans. Here another parable. The least amount of change in the physical world that one might imagine. Yeah, I really have gone for some. I think I was getting bored of reading the same poems over and over again, so I've gone for some real outliers here. This is Sonnet 142. Love is my sin. and thy dear virtue hate. A slew of, this is quite late in the party when most people are leaving. A slew of taxis hollows out the house. Nobody gets into the right one. Uber for Steve, Uber for Steve. Short circuit, short sell, sympathize with the bearer on demand. However long I've known you, I like to imagine I'm meeting you for the first time, painting a crooked halo. Your guardian angel puts my guardian angel in a headlock. On the eve of the Feast of the Guardian Angels, it is traditional to rent a bed. 1 star. I wish I could go lower. Is this for me? You do not get to exchange guardian angels, and there is no formal complaints procedure, a pity. On the lip of a decision, the remainder make espresso martinis, but the heat makes the flimsy glasses crack. You have invited our driver in, and now he's drunk, which is okay by me. He has a business opportunity. Mail order trees, I think. It's very long-term, very log-jammed. The angels eat their angel hair spaghetti. Was it really just insurance, your forbearance? I forgive only in order to be forgiven. You should too. The angels have such pity for us, we mistook it for our best interests. But what are they up to? I catch the gentle hick of suppressed asides every time. Take off your dust jacket and sit down again. Okay. Sonnet 18. I won't patronize you by reciting the first line of Sonnet 18. As I said earlier, I felt with the sort of better known, the more celebrated tea towel sonnets, that it was necessary to respond as prosaically as possible for some reasons of impudence, essentially. Yeah, Sonnet 18. Chesterfield's Calendar Act of 1750 introduced the Gregorian calendar, already used by the majority of Europe, to Great Britain, losing us 11 days. In order for us to get into sync, 1751 was only 282 days long. Up to that point, the year began on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, Lady Day. This is why, to this day, the tax year begins on April 6th, which on the old-style calendar is March 25th. That's wild, right? So the darling buds of May are actually shaken by the rough winds in the 16th century on July 17th, the day Lady died, 1959. I don't know if this is as important as it feels, but it feels important insofar as we might compare one another to a necessary adjustment which has unintended repercussions far beyond the administrative. Sonnet 33. This is kind of a hysterical love poem that like half riffs on Song of Solomon, as well as Sonnet 33. Full many a glorious morning have I seen. Name me one thing that doesn't cloud over. Do you think you can hide anything from me? I think you can look at me long enough and I'll evaporate. Like the song about songs, like the song of all songs, like the song of all songs about songs. When I was 5, another boy tricked me into looking at the sun. I knew he was lying. I did it anyway. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. If she be a wall and if she be a door festooned with cedars, I asked the watchmen that go about the city solemn and drunk. I founded a police state in your honor. You're looking very dapper, thank you. The theologian holds forth on the window seat. A collection of love poems spoken alternately by a man and a woman. Solomon's name is a later edition. Nobody knows the true author. There is no coherent story. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses. Strengthen me with raisins, renew me with apples, crescent moon of the sun-stained apple, the light on your brow, air brackets. You are rabbits digging holes in mountains of spices. Your hair is mountain goats running down the crevasse. All night I searched the bed for you. When we were singing to each other, it was good. It was good while it lasted. A fountain sealed, a spring shut up. How much better is thy love than wine? The ugly rack of clouds winched off the set for the next matinee, or not at all. Vulgar collusion of the metaphor, how every analogy passes over you like a cloud, as temporary, thank God, as trivial, cause me to hear it. Okay, it's another slightly more narrative-y one, Sonnet 29. Just a couple more to go. Thank you. for listening, by the way. Sonnet 29, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. I really like Sonnet 29. That is one of my faves. This one is even more self-referential than the others, if that were possible. I like to really kind of push that as an aesthetic until it just comes full circle. I have lost one of my shoes. All that follows is spoken by a man wearing one shoe. You should never trust a man wearing only one shoe. You seemed very comfortable with the brain surgeon. She's a neuroscientist. Whatever. We're just friends. I was lonely. Her clothes were very smooth. You make a cocktail and call it amygdala hijack. Poor me. Poor you, observers of our own predicament, lads on tour chanting God will forgive us. How far you can fall in everybody's estimation is proportional to the silent claims you always made on them. Nonetheless, I think of you and wouldn't swap places with anyone. Lying is one of the most sophisticated operations of the prefrontal cortex. The liar paradox is only unresolvable in languages which are semantically closed. We needn't moralize. In the end, to lie is to choose a meaningless universe. No one's saying it's easy to be honorable, but if you're not, you find yourself in uncharted territory, and it's scary. It's scary, man. I am saying this on stage at a book festival to the 6 people in the audience. They are looking at me like a sell-by date. Does cream of tartar even go off? You can't change anything once it's published. Afterwards, I sign one book. The man tells me to make it out to myself and to rewrite it to include this scene. On the 3-hour drive home, the clutch feels deep and chewy under my bare foot. An M40 diversion ejects me like a bad idea, and I end up going round in circles in the Vale of Evesham until I run out of petrol outside a walled garden. I can see lanterns, I can hear a string quartet, and the gate is open. 2 more. 73. Yeah, again, I don't know why I chose this one. Sonnet 73, that time of year thou mayest in me behold. This is one with an anecdote about my youngest kid. So I guess that's that. You never know. Because with a sequence that's fairly long, it really, the ones you choose to kind of read out when you're kind of selecting like 10 for a 20-minute reading, it really depends on your mood, right? And I've kind of accidentally given a really, really depressing reading in the past from this book. You have to kind of try to vary it slightly. I think maybe I was trying to do that. Anyway, Sonnet 73. Halfway through the party, I am invited to give a short talk about my children to the Council of Child Studies convening in the living room. When my youngest was 2, he used to shout "goodbye leaves" to the yellow leaves as they fell. Yesterday, he collected more leaves than he could carry on the way home from school, selecting the ones he described as valuable. But there were too many. When he was 3, I was carrying him home from nursery one October afternoon, and the sun and the moon were in the blue sky at the same time, and this produced in him a quasi-religious fervor, twisting in my arms to look east, then west, then east again, an incoherent babble as if speaking in tongues, which resolved into, I promise I'm not inventing this, it resolved into the colors describe the colors describe the colors. It causes me actual physical pain how much I love him. As a child, I liked to see the otters in the zoo, and I found them so endearing, my reaction was to grind my teeth together so hard I'd chip them slightly and feel a film of fine grit in my mouth. I'll read one more. This is from page 165. And it's, yeah, Sonnet 120, which is another one of my faves, actually. That you were once unkind befriends me now. You like that opening line? No. And this is about apologies and artificial intelligence. I tend to almost inexorably get drawn to writing about artificial intelligence at least once in every thing that I've written. Not sure why. Yeah, so it's a sort of vaguely near future dystopia, like say like 15 years time or something. This poem said. The first computer-generated apology was so graceful and convincing, people assumed it was fake, that there must be someone inside the casing operating tiny levers, but there wasn't. This created all sorts of possibilities. Soon, it was accepted that most relationships could benefit from some degree of artificial optimization via basic logic gates. We really listened to each other. When you do that, this is how it makes me feel. I'm not saying it's reasonable, but it's the reason I react the way I do. I'm sorry I made you feel like that. I didn't know. God, I love the long shadows in the evening. I'll try to be more aware of my tendency to, no, it's okay. I know I'm oversensitive and you're so kind to me. I know you didn't want or mean to make me feel like that. Yeah, but sometimes I try to preempt any negative reaction you might have instead of letting you express it. And I can see that that's actually a form of passive aggression on my part. Just fucking kiss me. But the thing was, it could get sort of convoluted sometimes. I just desperately want to talk to the real you. I need you to turn the artificial intelligence off for a moment. Tell them I'm already off, the AI would say. Tell them I've always been off. Thank you so much for listening. I will leave it there.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fun. I can sense the audience's applause. So that was absolutely fantastic. I mean,
who knows?
I love hearing you read your work. And also, what you don't notice so much when you're reading it is just actually when you're reading it for yourself in your head, it's just the wonderful rhythmic quality you bring to it when you're reading it. So it's wonderful to hear the genius who wrote them actually speaking those words. So yeah, I'm really interested, sort of, about what made you decide to set this at a party. So it's a clever idea. I mean, what prompted that that setting for this sequence?
I think it was, so in a way it just emerged by accident from writing that first poem, which was after going to a party but the party was attended by various people from the sort of tech and video game industry, and I felt fairly alienated while I was there. And there are certain, I mean, it's a sort of amalgamation throughout the collection of like 100 different house parties over time. And I think I was maybe sort of thinking like a lot of them, they would just show each other things on their phones, and the conversation was fairly, I'm not like saying that I'm a great conversationalist or anything, but it was fairly bad. When you're used to spending time with literary academics who are used to a certain level of engagement, which you realize is a privilege after a while when you're surrounded by tech pros. And I was like, what would their attitude be to literature? It's like their attitude to literature would be like saying that they'd memorized all of the sonnets, and this would be a thing. They would just turn that into a kind of party piece as well. So I was just writing that in a slightly bitchy sort of a way in my head while I was at this party, and refusing on moral grounds to participate in cocaine, because I think the means of production of cocaine are deeply problematic, however much people like it. And so, yeah, so it was kind of that. And then I just kept going back, because that's kind of a nice little one-off stupid poem that I enjoy reading out. And then I was like, what if I keep responding to the sonnets? Because I was sort of between projects. I needed a kind of something of a kind of palate cleanser before I started writing like another novel or anything like that. And I was like, I'm actually kind of enjoying this. I wrote a few more. Like 3 more over a few weeks, and then just was like, maybe I should just do all of them. Maybe I should just keep going with this. And then just because that first one was set at a party, the party kept kind of coming back in the sonnets, and I was like, okay, this maybe needs to be, and I can try to sort of justify this by saying it's a sort of commentary on the lyric and the occasionally slightly solipsistic tendencies of lyric poetry. Of certainly, it's my experience with lyric, and I love lyric poetry, but then actually, I think the sonnets as a sequence is crowded, and it has a sort of panoply of voices and of loves and of appropriate and inappropriate loves, and of hyper awareness of what your community thinks of you, or like what the people are. So in a way, like the other guests at the party become this kind of stand-in for who the speaker in the sonnets is, at times angry with, at times feeling judged by, at times sort of limerent for or in love with. And it's kind of, so it just becomes this kind of, it just became this setting for me that became increasingly enjoyable to explore. So in some ways it's like trying to bring something quite communal and polyphonic to a long sequence where there's just one speaker, and try to introduce a load of other voices. But I think the more I did it, the more I was like, there are so many voices here, and there's so much ambivalence, so much, even within the sort of inner life of the speaker, there are so many voices here, and so many different interactions with different disciplines, with the sciences, with so many different ways of trying to make sense of things, often of just trying to make sense of love or trying to make sense of something awful that you've done, but using various different, I don't know, the same form poetically, but so many different forms of knowledge and of understanding, and usually failing to make sense of that. I love poems that fail grandly, epically. That's kind of really wonderful.
Well, there's certainly no failed poems here. So, I mean, and it's fascinating you say that about the different voices, because I did have that question about how much of, because you referred to actually some of these poems as self-referential. I had wondered how much of you is in the sequence. I mean, that's the perennial question with the Shakespeare sonnets as well, isn't it? You know, how autobiographical are they? How much of you is in this sequence? You know, I noticed, I think in other works of yours as well, there's a kind of recurrence of voices that it's difficult to tell if this is a unitary voice, who's kind of self-doubting, a bit wry or cynical or sometimes socially awkward, or whether this is you thinking yourself into different characters. So tell us about, where is that kind of dividing line for you?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think I have messed around with that in the past, and perhaps particularly in Cain, where it's like, Cain is kind of like, there's sort of like fake confessional poems. Like it purports to be about, I suppose in that kind of, you know, sort of American postmodern way, in a way, like one of the characters has my name and is sort of ostensibly me, or is a kind of struggling poet who kind of is befriended by this figure who claims to be a descendant of Cain. But it's not as well. So it's kind of, but you kind of play with that tension in a way, because it's sort of, I think often people will just assume that it is more you than it really is. And I was like, well, then you can kind of have some fun with that in a way. You can sort of tease with that. It's the thing I often talk to my students about is like whether you're writing something for performance or just for the page. But like, particularly if you're kind of writing something for performance, you're feeling really nervous. The only thing that you have to do really is to be yourself, but worse. Like, don't, the thing that's putting you off and the thing that's holding you back is thinking that you have to be yourself, but better. And that's garbage. Just whatever it is that you actually find most difficult about yourself, like that's what you exaggerate. Like if you are an anxious person, then just be extremely anxious on stage. Like make that part of your act. Like you don't try to be other than who you are. And I think that goes for writing as well. It's like, and you kind of, I think it's sort of drawn to, I think poetry should, like the last thing that poetry should do is try to present oneself in a flattering light. That to me is like, plenty of exceptions to that, but I think I have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to that I find it quite off-putting, where it's just like, I don't quite buy this, and I'd rather know the thoughts that you struggle with. I'd rather know the things that are objectionable about you in some way. I don't know. It's weird. Quite whether I'm articulating that right, because it's like I don't want to read like hideous poems expressing kind of vile things at all. Like that's really not what I'm saying. But I think it's like, I think poetry is such an important vehicle for a kind of self-examination. You can do that through various different filters and various different lenses. You can be quite autobiographical at times, but you can mix that in with lots of other things. You can exaggerate. So there are moments that are really autobiographical in this book. There are moments that are direct sort of recreations from memory, and moments that are total fabrication, and it all just gets sort of woven into this whole thing. And that, so in that sense, like Shakespeare sonnets felt really liberating for that, right? It felt like this is a sort of beautifully infinite debate around autobiography and fiction within this sequence already, and that's something that you can, I think, fruitfully and enjoyably kind of play around with and sort of enter into that ambiguity, that kind of, and sometimes that's sort of what they call in sort of therapy, what they call the kind of therapeutic use of self. Like there has to be a certain, I think that's really healthy in writing. There's like, there can be a sort of certain distance, like this thing on the page isn't me, and it can't be. But I kind of, I'm still going to be using my identity. I'm still going to be drawing on my memories, my life, my experiences for that. But then I think you should just feel completely free to take that wherever you want, to sort of play in the boundaries between truth and fiction, I think. I think that's what makes your work so relatable. I think it's that sort of palimpsest, you know, you're into that, and where you're being personal or where you're not being personal, in a way that there's no difference in the sense that you're still reaching after a kind of truth. You're still reaching after a kind of authenticity of experience. And I think that makes your work really relatable.
Did you find, I mean, this is often what's said about notes on the sonnets, that it's made Shakespeare more accessible because it's relatable. It's and I know that this was also said by the judges of the Forward Prize, that it's actually opened up Shakespeare to a whole new generation. Did you feel when you were writing this that that's what you were doing consciously? I mean, did you have a sense that you wanted it to make Shakespeare more relatable in some way?
No, and I think I sort of really disagree with that as a pronouncement about it. Like, that could not have been further from my mind. That couldn't have been further from my mind. And I think one of the reasons I chose the sonnets is just various reasons, but I wanted it to be something kind of iconic. Like, if I'm going to kind of write these prose poems in response to kind of one of the most sort of open and formless poetic forms in response to one of the strictest and most finely crafted, it's like I wanted it to be a really, could have gone with Donne's Holy Sonnets, but there was just more. I just found more to play with and more scope in Shakespeare's sonnets. But it didn't. Yeah, no, there was nothing so noble or presumptuous as a kind of educational aim in mind at all. It was just like, I'm enjoying improvising with this. And I think quite often poetry to me feels like a sort of musical improvisation, feels like something, like it's the opposite of writing fiction to me. I struggle and hate writing fiction. It's mostly just a grim slog through the day's 500 words. And poetry is just a joy. I love the sort of the tangents you can go off on, the juxtapositions you can kind of get away with, and the narrative kind of brushing up against kind of complete anti-narrative. You can sort of lose yourself and lose the reader, and it can still be a certain abstracted pleasure, I think. So that I just adore that with poetry, right? And and in the same way, I once saw a jazz quartet playing. They played for about 45 minutes, based around the theme from Casualty. I think it was Casualty rather than Holby City. And they just played that over and over again with different variations, things like that. So and then that's really stayed with me. This was like 15 years ago that I saw this. It's like, this is beautiful. This is kind of, you take something kind of familiar as like the baseline, and then you can just stretch it in so many weird directions. As long as people have a point of reference, they'll follow you. And that's something that I think I sort of trust that in poetry. I trust that impulse, and I trust other poets who do that, and trust the reader to kind of, to a certain extent, go along with it. But sorry, to actually come back to what you asked, I felt a bit like, no, there are so many people who actually are opening out Shakespeare to a younger generation. There are so many brilliant English teachers who do that. There are so many brilliant academics who are actually properly, fully engaged with this, and also like directors and reinterpretations across the world, different things who do a huge amount, like whether it's kind of writing new plays using kind of underlying stories from Shakespeare's plays, or whether it's just something that kind of celebrates the kind of linguistic richness of it. There is, like, I think it didn't really strike me that needed doing, because like there's a lot of that as far as I'm concerned, and maybe it's luck of the draw. I was lucky at my secondary school to have a really good English teacher who was great at the time at just getting us quite excited about the work and opening it out. But so I felt a bit like about that statement. I was like, no, I don't think it's doing that. I mean, maybe I can use it in some writing workshops and just sort of encourage people to take their own kind of, perhaps I think it's something I'm often encouraging my own students to do. If we're writing based on classical mythology, it's like, we'll look at like Anne Carson, and we'll look at that guy who wrote the Lost Books of the Odyssey and things like that. It's like, look, it's great if you want to do this, but like really push it, really kind of push the material. Like there's no point in doing a kind of crap cover version of this. Nobody needs another retelling of the Minotaur that is just in sort of like cod blank verse and just is about a maze and a Minotaur, blah blah blah, threads. How utterly tedious. Like, if you're going to do this, like, decode it, look at what it's doing, find some contemporary resonances with it, get excited about the potential for that work. And I think that was sort of like, hopefully, I suppose that was kind of my attitude to sonnets as well. It's like, no one needs 154, actually no, that's exactly what I did. No one needs 154 troubled love poems, but that is exactly what you're going to get.
I do kind of feel that. I mean, it's almost like you took the sonnets and then threw a grenade on them, and then they sort of explode outwards. I mean, the fact that they exist, the fact that this book, Notes on the Sonnets, exists, it does, I guess, in a sense, make them relatable, because I guess the sense is, oh, okay, so there's more than one way to engage with Shakespeare, and the fact of that alone, aside from all of the amazing work you put into it and looking at these sonnets from so many different dimensions, I guess is a cause for celebration. So I can see that. It's really interesting listening to you in terms of how you got into it, sort of the organic way in which they evolved, rather than with a sense that, okay, this is my mission here, which I think, yeah. I mean, just to pick up on what you were saying earlier about Shakespeare, yeah, I did want to sort of get a bit more from you on this. You know, why is doing this about Shakespeare say different to doing, you know, a sequence based on Donne or any other poet? Did you feel there is something that separates Shakespeare out? I mean, we always use this word cultural capital, don't we? This term, highly problematic term, but there's you know, there is a certain cachet, I guess, to Shakespeare. I mean,
it's true.
Is Shakespeare different? And does it feel different working with Shakespeare than with? Because I know you're very elusive in your work. I mean, does it feel different approaching this?
It does. That's a really good point, I think, and it does feel different, and it felt sort of closer to, I suppose, the way that I was using like the Book of Genesis in Cain, in a way, like, because I think it is that it's that level of literature, right? In which case it can take kind of radical reinterpretations. It can take that, I suppose, and I guess, like I was like, I don't like. I suppose I'm sort of rather bored by the idea of kind of cover versions. So it's like, do something new if you're going to do it at all. But I think maybe there's just more, it feels more permissive somehow that you can do that with Shakespeare's work, because it has such a long history of reinterpretation, such a long history of critique from so many different angles as well. There's a book by I only got sent a copy of this like a few months after the book came out, but there's a book by the Canadian poet Sonnet Abbas called Sonnets Shakespeare, which actually does a really similar thing. And I was like, oh my God, like, someone could have told me this. The book is not published in the UK, so I just didn't come across it, which is a shame.
There's no patent or anything.
Thankfully, there's no patent, but yeah, so I don't know. Reverse engineered props to Sonnet Abbas. It's a great book. And kind of takes a sort of more, I don't know, but it's about kind of one's own subject position as well. Like it's so Sonnet Abbas's book is a sort of more of a critique of the sonnets from a sort of gender and race perspective, and I hope that I kind of brought that into my own as well, but also just with this sort of awareness that I'm writing it as a white English man myself, kind of that you know, that there are certain things that it's less for me to comment on, but still sort of actually try to show an awareness of. But it's that, I think it's like you say, it is different. It is different working with Shakespearean material, and it did feel closer to me to working with passages from the passages about Cain from Genesis, chapter 4, I think, if memory serves. But it's iconic enough that it feels like, at the same, you know, sort of ridiculously insolent and disrespectful. At the same time, also you're allowed to do this. Like, this is such a totemic work that it's okay. So maybe that gives you more latitude. It gives you more freedom. You can be more sort of confident with it, and perhaps more than I would have done with another poet. Certainly with anything more contemporary, or with anything, I guess, less central to the literary tradition.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, in a way, the way you just described it, it kind of answers the question I was going to ask you about, in a way that whether you had any trepidation about taking on this kind of icon, because often Shakespeare has been in the past, and sometimes still is, kind of synonymous with elitism. And did you have any anxiety about reproducing that elitism or reinforcing it, or did you feel, and I'm guessing you did, in terms of what you just said, that what you were doing was partly breaking down that icon, even, you know, while evoking it.
Yeah, but I think we're invited to do that just in sitting down and reading the sonnets, or even opening it at random and reading a few. It's kind of like, and if there's anything in terms of sort of relatability or accessibility, I think it's that. I think it's like, just don't, I don't know. I mean, it's beautiful to spend weeks just breaking down and analyzing a single poem, but I think I also just felt like actually just look at these as a whole and read them quickly, and read them for sort of elements of story and character as well, and just expressions of profound doubt, and just enjoy that element of it, and enjoy the kind of problematic elements of them as well. That, like, half the time these are not kind of beautiful, noble love poems. These are stories about being pissed off because somebody you were having an affair with has started having an affair with somebody else you were formerly having an affair with. Like, these are bad feelings, and like feelings of completely unacceptable possessiveness and jealousy, and kind of self-conscious kind of idealization and sort of bitter rivalries, and like just enjoy that and love that and kind of respond to that and feel on a par with that to a certain extent. Like look at your own experience and look at your own writing with that, feel a kind of, in a way, like feel a sense of entitlement, like don't hold back on that just because they are so beautiful like, and so well done. Like don't kind of be put off. I think there's like a little bit too much like, can't go near that, can't touch that. It's like, well, like try and fail utterly, but like create something interesting in the process of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I think, this book is so inspirational. I think it does almost license that kind of, as it going and throwing a grenade over Shakespeare and then seeing what happens, what will the result be. I've also just noticed we have a question in the Q&A, and anybody who wants to, feel free to stick a question in the Q&A box. This is from Lisa Vanco. If you were riffing on the sonnets like a jazz musician as you wrote, to what extent are the poems as they appear in the published work stream of consciousness? That's a really good question.
That's a very good question. There's a sort of, I think like the way that I write quite often with poetry is that it will initially be really quite stream of conscious in sort of first draft. And I kind of threw myself at this project over the best part of a year that kind of spilled into the lockdown. And it was very drafty, and the method was just, read the sonnet, reread it, read some things about the sonnet, read some of the actual brilliant literary critics who've written on the sonnet, try to absorb as much as possible about it, and then just write something and sort of keep the sort of vague narrative of your own sequence in mind, bring in whatever memories it stirs in you. So quite improvisatory, quite natural. But a lot of them were just bad, right? In that first draft, a lot of them were. I think I had like 10. Occasionally I would write something I was happy with and I would post it immediately on Twitter, like I was Rupi Kaur on Instagram or something like that. But most of the time, it wasn't great. It just wasn't terribly interesting. It didn't produce a terribly interesting poem. So I had this kind of big manuscript, and I just went over it with my editor, who's a guy called Tom Chivers, who runs Pens in the Margins, who just has been so useful to work with over the last few years. And we just sort of went through, like, which ones are good and why are they good, and we made this, you need to draw out the kind of the fact that this is happening at a party a little bit more, that needs to be more in your mind. Some of these you just need to scrap and have another run at. So I did. So then there was like another year of just going back through the, let's say, sort of half to 2/3 that I hadn't made quite a good enough go of the first time. And then after that, the editing process is a sort of layering, right? And that's something that I suppose I often do with poetry. You go back over all of the really clumsy phrases, kind of stand out like a sore thumb. So you kind of do something with them or take them out. There are moments where you think, okay, there's an idea here that I can draw out a bit more. I can add something here. I can add another layer of either image or ideas or another character. And so it's like another, again, that's like another spell of kind of improvising on the same work, but with the pre-existing drafts that you've got. So that felt like quite a sort of fluid process. So it's like, so I think, yeah, I totally would go along with the kind of stream of consciousness thing. I think the whole sequence, part of the energy of it is this inundating and kind of overwhelming and sometimes probably quite annoying, subconsciously annoying, kind of like being stuck with somebody at a party who won't stop talking and you're trying to get away from them. I think at times it kind of maybe captures that, like somebody who's actually a bit much, a bit too intense. It's like, can you go and talk to someone else now? Like, that sort of happens throughout. But that, yeah, I like that as a label of it. But I think it's also just like stream of consciousness itself kind of takes quite a lot of rewriting to make that flow, I think. So it's so it starts off as something very fast, and then there's like a lot of stages of trying to make it into something that feels like a slightly more coherent stream of consciousness, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thanks for that question, Lisa. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear your process. And yeah, I mean, this has got me thinking about some of the details of poems. I just love, I love your take on Shakespeare's Sonnet 33. It always makes me laugh out loud. And I think I don't know how self-consciously you did this. So Sonnet 33 is the one where it's the one based on full many a glorious morning have I seen. And it's the one where you have that wonderful line, that list of comparisons to the beloved. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses. You are rabbits digging holes in mountains of spices. Your hair is mountain goats running down the crevasse. I absolutely love it, because we have in my classes, we sort of discuss the blason tradition, spelled Blazon. So blason is that tradition where you break down the lover's body parts and you compare them to different things. You know, your eyes are like stars and your hair, I don't know, like spun wire or whatever, golden wire. And so Philip Sidney did this whole thing kind of, you know, near contemporary of Shakespeare's, and he would often mock that whole convention. So he has one sonnet where he compares the lover's hands with horsemen. How can hands be horsemen? Galloping fingers, what does this mean? And I mean, I was wondering how subconsciously you were engaging with that tradition, because it's weird, because the whole blason tradition is all about, you're supposed to get closer to your beloved and to try to describe them and to capture them somehow, this image. But actually, the more you try to describe them, further and further away you get, and the more absurd the images become. I mean, were you engaging with that in a subconscious fashion? Yeah,
no, that was definitely in there, but in a way, I think that's so often something that I'm toying with in poetry, is like the analogy that is weirdly apposite but stretched about as far as it possibly can and almost completely falls apart, like it's almost just ridiculous, and has elements of like parody to it. I think elements of it just being like, this is such an absurd thing for me to even be trying to do. But then there's so much there is so much kind of impossibility in you can feel this kind of strain in the original sonnets sometimes, of just, I'm trying to get across how strongly I feel about you, particularly now that we've broken up, particularly now that I've screwed up so badly that you don't even want to talk to me anymore, and now you've become this kind of hallowed, unattainable thing for me. So sometimes, that I think it's that moment for me where like the blason tradition can like Eliot's patient etherized upon a table for the horizon, like it can tell you more about the narrator than it does about the beloved, right? It's mostly that the narrator is slightly unhinged or is sort of temporarily has temporarily sort of taken leave of their senses. They are overwhelmed, and what they're expressing is that that impossibility. But it works, I think, sort of sincerely and romantically in the sonnets as well. It's just that there are lots of different ways of saying you are indescribably wonderful, which is kind of almost excess. And some of the things that we sort of the sort of old axes of like creative writing classes, like sort of show, don't tell. There's so much telling. It's glorious telling. It's a lot of telling, and it's this sort of thing against the sort of more sort of diary-like tradition. It's like we don't find out much, deliberately don't find out that much specific about this person. It's like, what exactly is it that makes this person so addictive and so worthy of my infatuation? We don't know. We have to kind of take that on trust. It's like, which maybe is what love is like sometimes. I was reading Gillian Rose's Love's Work when I was writing as well, which I just adore as a sort of book of creative philosophy, but there's some painful descriptions of love within that book, and kind of infatuation and impossibility as well. And I think that sort of fed into it a little bit as well. It's this kind of struggle to articulate something that's so hard that we go back and try to find models and examples for, and that can be consoling and it can inspire new expressions, but it still feels like it's slightly out of reach. And I guess if it wasn't slightly out of reach, we'd stop. If it didn't have that slightly Tantalus and the pit quality to it, we'd just stop writing, right? Stop. We felt like we could actually articulate it once and for all.
Yeah. And did you have a sense, I mean, you mentioned earlier kind of that you do sort of touch on, say, the relations between the genders, for instance. So did you have a sense of, I don't know, the thing with the sonnets is obviously it plays around with concepts of gender quite a lot. Did you have a sense that you were building on that somehow, or riffing on it, or interacting with that kind of engagement with gender? Yeah,
I think and that felt sort of liberating in a way. And I think for sometimes for the gender of the speaker not to be particularly specific, and I think I mean, it doesn't explicitly talk about kind of sort of non-binary identity. It doesn't specifically talk about kind of bisexuality either, but it's sort of in there. It's sort of, and it's in the sort of slippage between who is the you here, who is being sort of fawned over and who isn't, and that shifts throughout the book. And it's not just that the narrator is kind of completely sort of incontinently infatuated with everyone that he meets, or he sort of is. But that kind of, I suppose that sort of, that, I don't know. Yeah, I think that felt like a really enjoyable thing to play around with and to be allowed. I felt like the sonnets really allowed for that. quite openly, I think, quite refreshingly, and that not necessarily just the different kinds of love, that to be quite open. I've been working with an Italian translator recently he's like picking out like 20 that he's translating and is really struggling with the really struggling with the genders and the forms and the kind of, he's like, look, who is the you in this line? Like, I need to know because that affects how the words are spelled. And so I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to commit to that. So we've had quite long conversations actually about trying to draw out in some of the poems, like, who's the you here? So, well, in this sentence, the you is just the general you. One might think this, one might do this, one might feel this. And then in the very next sentence, it's I'm directly talking to somebody specific, or the narrator is being addressed. And I think that's because there's not that much in the way of speech marks and punctuation. It just sort of flows in that way. And so sometimes it's supposed to be ambiguous who's speaking or who's being spoken to, and that's actually part of that. That's a kind of deliberate slippage in a way. That's part of that, the way in which we just blend together in love or at a social occasion. But it's been kind of interesting having to make that more specific for the purposes of a translation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's particularly fascinating in terms of that. Reading your notes on the sonnets with the sonnets, comparing those slippages of gender, I think is really interesting. So I think, I've just seen we'll come to the end of the session, but I highly recommend everybody to buy notes on the sonnets. It's such a fantastic collection. It's very deep as well. I mean, I had so many questions that I would have loved to have asked you, because some of these, they're the sorts of, just like Shakespeare's sonnets, you can read them again and again and never exhaust them. And that's what I really love about them. There's a real depth to them, as well as kind of moments of high lyricism, almost moments touching on mysticism, I felt in places as well, kind of a sense of the revelatory, which you juxtaposed beautifully with some of those more down-to-earth kind of revelations. So I just absolutely loved it. So thank you so much for talking to us about your amazing collection, and congratulations again on the Forward Prize win. And thank you everybody for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Chris, thanks so much for such a lovely interview. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Cheers, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye.